이제 오늘 마지막 발표는 레슬리 대학교의 앤드류 올렌스키 교수님께서 해주시겠습니다. 올렌스키 교수님께서는 영국 랭커스터 대학에서 박사학위를 취득하신 뒤 미국 하버드 대학 및 스리랑카 대학에서 다양한 연구를 하셨고 명상과 심리치료 연구소의 오랜 위원으로 활동하고 계십니다. 교수님께서는 불교와 내과학 사이에 심신을 바라보는 관점에 있어서 많은 유사점이 있다고 생각하시는데요. 불교적 관점에서 명상은 어떻게 치유 또는 깨달음을 가지고 오는지에 대해서 영상을 보내오셨습니다.
Greetings, and thank you for inviting me to share a few remarks on the topic of meditation and neuroscience. The specific question I've been asked to address today is, how can meditation work for healing or enlightenment from the Buddhist perspective? And though I will bring a scientific outlook to this inquiry, I speak not as a neuroscientist, but as a scholar of early Buddhist thought and practice. The views of the mind and body put forward in ancient India in the texts attributed to the historical Buddha are similar in many respects to the scientific way we regard these things today, which is one of the reasons for the modern world's continuing interest in Buddhist ideas and practices. It is also a reason for looking to traditional lore to help us understand ourselves better, both to become as healthy as possible individually, but also to learn how to act more skillfully as we face many difficult current challenges together. The first similarity I would like to acknowledge between the ancient and modern approaches to the topic of consciousness, and I am by no means the first to point this out, is a shared interest in empirical observation as a primary means for gaining knowledge. Early Buddhists rejected the appeal to revealed scripture, to popular opinion or conventional wisdom, to the often seductive powers of rationalization, and even to the unquestioning authority of one's own teacher. The Buddha insisted that his followers know and see things for themselves through direct experience. While the neuroscientist primarily uses third-person techniques, studying the mind by looking at the brains of other people, the primary tool wielded by the ancient Buddhist was the first-person direct observation of one's own mind through the practice of meditation. Another similarity is that in early Buddhist teachings, consciousness is considered to be an emergent phenomenon. While eternalists, both ancient and modern, regard the mind as something essentially transcendent to the world, and materialists, then and now, think of the mind as an epiphenomenon or offshoot of the material brain, classical Buddhist theory insists upon the thorough interdependence of mind and body. Without veering towards either of these two extremes, says one text, the Buddha teaches his doctrine by a middle way. That is, consciousness emerges in an environment of multiple interrelated conditions. Among the metaphors used to rule out some of the conventional views of the day, mind and body are not identical, as a flame in its color, are not projected one from the other, like a shadow cast by a tree, are not contained by one another like scent in a flower or a jewel in a box, and the mind does not inhabit the body just as music does not live somewhere in a lute. While it may be the case that many neuroscientists are materialists at heart, the main target of their study is the functioning of non-material mental phenomena. Here's another shared perspective between ancient and modern approaches to the mind. Consciousness is seen not as a thing that exists, but as an activity that occurs. Whether we use EEG scanners and fMRI scanners as a research tool, or focused awareness and open monitoring meditations, it is an unfolding process that is the object of our investigations. The firing of a neuron is an episodic event with a beginning, middle, and end measured in microseconds. After firing, it must rest before it's activated again. This was equally true of a large array of neuronal systems whose activation is synchronized, resulting in pulsing patterns of globally coordinated activity, interspersed with micro moments of rest. In our sensors and scanners, this shows up as oscillations of varying frequencies, corresponding to different expressions of processing activity. To the meditator, it presents as moments arising and passing away in the stream of consciousness. One of the Buddha's foremost followers, Sariputta, is said to have had insight into states one by one as they occurred. Known to him those states arose, known they were present, and known they disappeared. One difference between the traditional and scientific approach to understanding the mind is the emphasis placed on the spatial relations between mental components. Identifying specific regions of the brain and mapping out their connectivity has been a central agenda of modern neuroscience. While this matter is entirely unknown and irrelevant to subjective methods of studying the mind. From the Buddhist perspective, mind as an activity does not come from anywhere or go anywhere. While it is understood that mental objects are dependent on a physical organ of the body, which they called the heart base, and we would probably call the brain, much like sight is dependent on the eye or sound on the ear, no consideration is given in traditional lore to spatial analysis of the mind, and in fact such imagery was discouraged. Sariputta is said to have understood from his insight that these states, not having been, come into being, and having been, they vanish. The timing of mental events, however, what events happen when, is a matter of shared concern for both meditators and neuroscientists. The neuron, notwithstanding its extended network of spatial interconnections, is primarily a cell that performs its function in time by firing for a precise instant. While it is clear that a massive amount of parallel processing transpires in the nervous system, along primary sensory pathways and by various mid-level subliminal parsing faculties, it is equally evident that subjective, conscious, phenomenal experience unfolds as a linear series. A lot is going on in the mind and body from the third-person point of view, but from the first-person vantage point, we are only capable of really being aware of one thing at a time. This is a key insight of the meditative traditions, and though it appears otherwise, it can be verified easily enough in direct experience. Research has exposed multitasking to be a folk belief. In fact, we are shifting attention rapidly from one object to another, synthesizing a sense of cohesiveness as we go. The mind has evolved to handle most, and perhaps all, of what we need done to stay alive in an automatic way, which is to say that most of its functions are governed by instinct, reflex, habit, conditioned response, and various forms of learned behavior that remain largely unconscious. Many of these are genetically pre-installed into our operating system, much like software is installed in a computer, and is similarly updated as needed on a regular basis. It turns out that what we call conscious awareness, the sensing of knowing what is happening in our experience as it happens in the present moment, has a relatively modest role to play. It is increasingly becoming clear that conscious awareness functions mainly to monitor what is already happening in the mind and body, rather than to initiate action. And its ability to change what is already happening is more limited than the popular ideals of free agency would suggest. Returning to Sariputta, we note that after gaining access to seeing the flow of the stream of consciousness, and following upon his recognition that these states appear out of nowhere and then vanish, he finally goes on to name what he sees. These states were defined by Sariputta one by one as they occurred, says the text. He does this by identifying each of the mental factors that are present in a given moment of consciousness. The early Buddhist model of the mind and body is built upon such empirical observations of what factors are active in the mind at any given moment. The classical Buddhist model of minimum mental function is built around the 5 aggregates and 6 sense spaces. Each moment of consciousness arises in dependence on a paired sense organ and its associated object, which are material, and based on this contact, there co-arise is 3 other mental phenomena. A feeling tone that is either pleasant or painful, sometimes neutral. A perceptual interpretation of the object that is learned through language and culture over time. And a specific grouping of mental factors covering a wide range of intentional and emotional responses to the object. The stream of consciousness is made up of moments of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, and flows along intermingled with parallel streams of feeling, perception, and intention. The more developed psychological models of the Abhidhamma add some depth to this picture by providing a more granular view. Consciousness is seen as arising each moment together with a host of supporting factors called cetasika, or mental factors belonging to that mind moment, so much like a king is accompanied by his courtly entourage. 3 of these attendants will be the other mental aggregates of feeling, perception, and intention, as already mentioned, and 4 other factors are added: contact, attention, focus, and arousal, to amount to 7 so-called universal mental factors that will always arise together in every mind moment. Another 45 factors, grouped as 6 occasional factors, 14 unhealthy factors, and 25 healthy factors, may or may not arise in various combinations. This is how Buddhist texts describe the phenomenological landscape it uncovers in meditation. Each mind moment is unique, and some particular pattern of co-arising mental factors emerges with consciousness moment after moment to shape the changing textures of lived experience. Each of the mental factors identified in the Abhidhamma tradition, insofar as they have a specific function, no doubt correspond to identifiable neural networks and phased arrays of synchronized oscillating activity. Varela's project of neurophenomenology, wherein first and third person mental events are mapped to one another, has yet to be fulfilled, but the work progresses steadily. With only the basic set of 7 universal mental factors present, the mind can be thought of as being in a default mode, and the mental system is operating on automatic pilot in an apparently random way. It is not actually random, of course, because it is embedded in a matrix of cause and effect and is subject to a host of both internal and external conditions. Since attention is a universal mental factor, it is always present, working like the rudder of a ship, steering the mind to the next object. But in default mode, when the mind is wandering, there may be no hand on the tiller. Intention, too, is a universal factor directing attention, but the helmsman may be alert or asleep at the wheel. Which is to say, the decisions guiding where the mind goes next may be conscious or not conscious. In any given moment, attention might be placed on some incoming environmental stimulus, such as a sight or a sound, or it may be responding to a memory, an association, or some other internal mental object. All this seems to correspond broadly to the functioning of the interrelated set of brain regions identified by neuroscientists as the default mode network. Anyone can take a moment to notice that there is a parade of thoughts, emotions, sensations, and feelings passing through the window of experience. But it takes a more focused and disciplined observation techniques to see this in a sustained way. Just as scientists vastly expand their view of what they study by the use of various instruments, so too does mental training in the form of meditation enhance the ability of a person to observe the flow of inner mental states. Meditation is a tool to be used for the empirical investigation of the mind and its experience of the body. What meditation accesses is the linear flow of the stream of consciousness, as one observes the apparent rise and fall of mental states. Phenomena come into view, and then, because of the inherent impermanence of a neuronal event, they immediately expire. The practice of meditation begins with the attempting to influence some conscious control over the mind wandering taking place in the default mode, which involves, among other things, engaging the executive functions of the prefrontal cortex. The primary tools we have for doing this, according to Buddhist psychology, are the 6 so-called occasional mental factors, the first 2 of which are directed thought, vitakka, and sustained thought, vichara. Directed thought is the mental function of deliberately placing the mind on a particular object. This is where it starts to feel like we are thinking or acting on purpose or consciously and gain a sense of agency. We use this ability to steer our own course through the mind when we tell a story or solve a problem, or otherwise intentionally move from one object to another. Directed thought breaks the continuity of the default mode network as we focus on a specific task rather than following the wandering mind. Neurologically, activity in the posterior cingulate cortex and medial prefrontal cortex diminishes as the task-focused apparatus of the frontal parietal network, including the prefrontal cortex, becomes active. Because the mind moves as fast as it does, we also need help from the mental factor of sustained thought, vichara, to hold the attention on the chosen object once it has successfully made its way there. Working together, the ability to direct attention deliberately to a particular thought or object and then be able to sustain that attention serves to allow us to disengage from the automaticity of the default mode and enter into the intentional use of the mind. Classical texts refer to images of taming an elephant or bringing a chariot into some sort of control. Directed thought and sustained thought are powerful tools, but as with all tools, they may or may not do their work easily or successfully. Remember, we are engaging the mind moment by moment, and every moment is different. One might successfully place the attention on a chosen object, such as the breath or a mantra or a visualization, only to have it hijacked by a sound in the room, a compelling feeling tone in the body, or an apparently random thought that flutters into the mind. In the ensuing moments, these become the object of awareness, and the tools of conscious control are cast aside. When you do not direct the mind at an object, objects direct themselves to your mind. So much of the time we are not in control of our experience, but rather are carried away by it on an excursion, and we may get quite far along on the journey before we even realize that we've been taken for a ride. This is why so many people find meditation to be difficult when they first try it. The intention might be to direct the mind in special ways, but the powers of habit and reflex are strong and carry the attention elsewhere at every opportunity. To meditate is to witness the interplay between the intentional and unintentional functioning of the mind. With increased ability to wield attention intentionally and maintain its stability over multiple mind moments, one gains the capacity to see more clearly and monitor more effectively the objects arising and passing away in experience. The aim of focused awareness meditation is to reach a state of calm but aroused equanimity, a state in which the mind, like a bowl of water left to become still, will reflect accurately whatever object presents itself at one of the 6 sense doors of the senses and the mind. The problem is that the mind is seldom allowed to become so peaceful, as an array of mental factors impinge upon consciousness to hinder or obstruct its ability to focus. Some of these hindering factors are relatively benign. Others can be the source of considerable distress and suffering. When experiencing one of the afflictive emotional states, some combination of 14 unhealthy mental factors listed in the Abhidhamma are present and pouring in on consciousness to interfere with its ability to see things as they actually are. Neuroscientists recognize this situation as corresponding to the activation of the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system by the hypothalamus, unleashing a flood of stress hormones and engaging the limbic system generally and the amygdala in particular. A classic list of 5 primary hindrances are the most immediate obstacles to a peaceful mind. The most common challenge for the first-time meditators is restlessness, the factor that is present when there's too much agitation in the mind and body, followed by sluggishness when there is too little vitality. Here we can use phenomenological feedback to adjust the energy level in the mind and body and find a balanced state that is simultaneously tranquil and alert. The mental factors, so next one faces the natural tendency to want what is pleasant and not want what is unpleasant. The mental factor called sense desire pulls the mind towards some objects, while the factor of ill will pushes it away from others. Here too, it is possible to find the middle point between these two inclinations, a state of equanimity, and for the mind to simply be aware of something without favoring or opposing it. The final hindrance is the kind of doubt that weakens the mind, which can be counteracted by developing trust and becoming more resolute. With all 5 hindrances temporarily put to rest, the mind is able to become concentrated, a state described as purified, bright, and unblemished. Yet even when we are able to wrest some conscious control from the default mode network by cultivating the activity of the prefrontal cortex, and are able to establish some steadiness of mind, we are not out of the woods. In addition to the 5 hindrances already mentioned, we face a virtual army of mental and emotional afflictions that can charge into the mind from unconscious realms at any moment. Foremost of these are the 3 primary toxins of greed, hatred, and delusion. But almost a dozen others are named and identified in the Abhidhamma, and many variants of these are enumerated in later literature. At their worst, these afflictions lie at the heart of the major mental health disorders that plague the modern world, expanding well beyond the annoying impact of the 5 hindrances. Restlessness can be amplified into worry, anxiety, fear, and even panic. Sluggishness can evolve into depression, chronic unhappiness, and despair. Sense desire may manifest in various forms of compulsion and addiction. Ill will, in strong forms, can result in hatred, rage, violence, and cruelty. And doubt can grow into the crippling loss of confidence, trust, and self-esteem. Meditation practices may or may not help with the treatment of these many afflictions, and is certainly contraindicated in extreme cases of any of them. From the Buddhist perspective, these are unhealthy mental factors that co-arise with consciousness to hijack the universal and occasional functions of the mind and turn the global mind moment into one of psychological affliction and mental suffering. Their presence is the cause of dis-ease and illness, and the way of restoring well-being is to eradicate them from the mind, first as momentary states, and then as abiding underlying traits. One of the things that makes the harmful mental factors so ubiquitous and even compelling is that they are often useful, insofar as they can be effective in bringing about an outcome, and this is part of the seductive hold they have on us. Taking greed and hatred as an example. All human beings are born with these as components of their basic instincts. They are useful for survival, which is why they've been naturally selected to remain in our gene pool. But they come at a cost to our well-being. These mental states are a source of suffering, both for ourselves and for those around us. And as such, they can be seen as an illness we are born with and that we carry as a chronic condition. When greed or hatred are enacted as mental states, they evoke behavior that causes harm to others and provokes from them similar mental states that can result in harm to ourselves. They also damage us inwardly by strengthening the underlying tendencies toward greed and hatred. Every time we act out an unhealthy state, it reinforces and amplifies its corresponding unhealthy traits. Psychologically, this manifests as the stress response, flooding the body with cortisol, adrenaline, and other stress hormones, and putting the body into fight or flight mode. While we know this can be helpful, and even necessary in dire circumstances, research has well documented the overall harm this does when sustained over time. This brings us to the matter of health and the relationship between meditation, health, and well-being. The fundamental paradigm of Buddhist thought and practice is of healing the mind of its afflictions by a process of purification, and meditation is the regimen that can bring this about. Just as a body is healthy when it is free of viruses, infections, and diseases, so too is the mind healthy when cleansed of its toxic mental factors. When the body is afflicted with illness, it can be treated at the level of presenting symptoms or its underlying causes. So too does treating mental affliction involve mitigating symptoms for a temporary relief of suffering by replacing unhealthy mental states with healthy states, and working to eradicate the deeper underlying causes of the illness itself by replacing unhealthy mental and emotional traits with healthy traits. In Buddhist thought, the mind is regarded as being naturally healthy, only afflicted by toxins that are seen as external to the essential nature of consciousness. One way this is put in a famous passage, this mind is luminous. It is defiled by the defilements that come into it, and it can be released from the defilements that have come into it. The unhealthy mental factors cannot be eliminated by resisting or suppressing them, nor is accepting and acting them out in hopes of getting them out of the system going to be effective. Both strategies involve a form of craving and only makes matters worse. The preferred method, enabled by meditation practice, is to be aware of unhealthy states, understand that they cause harm to oneself and others, and abandon them. Open monitoring meditation practice trains us to abide without clinging to anything whatsoever in the world, as a classic text puts it. Without either favoring or opposing unhealthy states, one allows them to be swept away by the natural laws of impermanence. They will come up again until their roots are pulled up, but as time goes on, they will gradually do so less often, with less intensity, and for shorter durations. We often think of mindfulness training as learning how to focus attention on the next moment, when in fact it has more to do with learning to let go of the last moment. We can only notice what happens next by letting go of what is happening now. If we engage with present experience, with any trace of holding on or pushing away, it becomes sticky, and we are no longer able to disengage from it. Whenever an unhealthy mental factor is not arising, it allows for healthy factors to emerge and exert their influence on the mind. It is a fundamental tenet of Buddhist psychology that the two cannot co-inhabit the same mind moment, though it is not uncommon for the two qualities of mind to alternate rapidly. When a person is hateful, they cannot at the same time be loving, though they may feel love and hate in different mind moments, even toward the same object. Just as deep internal unhealthy traits drive the human mind to cause harm and to suffer, equally deep and influential internal traits direct the mind to happiness and well-being. The natural antidotes to greed, hatred, and delusion are generosity, kindness, and wisdom, along with their many associated factors such as compassion, equanimity, trust, and honesty. The good news is that whenever the mind is free from the influence of the toxins, even if only for a moment, it can naturally experience profound well-being. The entry point for accessing healthy states of mind is mindfulness, which always co-arises with a remarkable 18 other factors, according to the Abhidhamma. A moment of mindfulness is therefore also a moment of equanimity, of loving kindness, of generosity, and is always confident and morally correct. Mindfulness also renders the mind tranquil and light, and it is said to become malleable and wieldy, suggesting that a healthy mind is also more open to the transformative processes of neuroplasticity. Meditation now goes beyond mere directing the mind consciously to an object and goes beyond deflecting the poisoned arrows launched from the unconscious and becomes a tool for actively developing the host of positive qualities that contribute to health and happiness. When mental states are routinely healthy, bringing temporary relief from afflictive mental factors, the mind is cured of the symptoms of suffering. This allows wisdom to gradually develop, further treating the underlying causes and working more deeply toward a final cure for the causes of suffering. Meditation trains the conscious mind to replace unhealthy states with healthy states, thereby transforming the unconscious mind as unhealthy traits are gradually replaced with healthy traits. Finally, according to classical Buddhist teachings, we are all afflicted with the disease of suffering, and the cure can only be found in final awakening. When the toxins that poison the mind from within, greed, hatred, and delusion, are uprooted once and for all, such that they may never arise again, a person is said to be awakened. This is a noble ideal for all to aspire, but is also out of the reach of many. What if, instead, we aspired to vanquish these toxins from the mind one moment at a time? Is not a moment devoid of greed, hatred, and delusion an awakened moment? Such moments are accessible to everyone and are inherently valuable, even if it's not possible to sustain them for more than an instant. If your body were racked with pain, would you not welcome relief, even if it were temporary? And if you had long-term chronic pain that you knew was incurable, would you not be grateful for it to diminish to whatever extent possible? This is the promise meditation holds for all of us, that we can experience moments entirely devoid of suffering, and that we can also significantly diminish our capacity for causing suffering to one another. If we manage to do this now and then, for a moment here and there, might we not learn to do it more consistently? Eventually, we may even be able to change everything. Thank you for your time and attention. Be well.
네, 장시간 강의 감사드립니다. 불교적 관점에서 명상을 바라볼 때 깨달은 사람을 추구하는 것이 아니라 그러한 깨달은 순간을 얻기를 소망하는 것을 의미한다는 내용이 참 인상적으로 다가왔는데요. 이번 행사를 통해 코로나로 지치신 많은 분들이 명상을 통해 깨달은 순간을 조금씩 더 누적하는 그런 계기가 되기를 바라봅니다. 자, 2부 세션에서 멋진 발표를 해주신 세 분의 연자님께 다시 한 번 더 감사드리고요. 이제 질의응답 시간으로 다시 돌아오겠습니다. 감사합니다.